Hello, welcome back to the ASMR library. You certainly got through those last few books very quickly. Did you enjoy them? Wonderful. And so does this mean that you are looking for some more recommendations? Beautiful. Well, I must tell you, I somewhat anticipated you this time, and I actually have ready another few books to recommend to you. So if you have the time now, I would be very happy to go through them. Great. Well, you just relax, and I will go through these 3 books. I will tell you there is somewhat of a theme, and that is historical fiction or stories based on history. This is actually purely a coincidence. I just happened to pick out 3 stories that I thought you would like, and then when I was looking over them, I realized that I had picked 3 historical stories. So, the first one is a novel called Longbourn by Joe Baker. Now, if you recognize the name Longbourn, that's because it is the name of the estate in which the Bennet family live in Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, and this is no coincidence. Longbourn is a retelling of that exact period of time, but from the perspective of the servants of that great yet shambling estate. So it's an extremely captivating story for anyone who is interested in the day-to-day minutiae of any particular period in history. This one happens to be Regency England. So I will just read from the blurb for you. It is wash day for the housemaids at Longbourn, and Sarah's hands are chapped and raw. Domestic life below stairs, ruled with a tender heart and an iron will by Mrs. Hill, the housekeeper, is about to be disturbed by the arrival of a new footman bearing secrets and the scent of the sea. So that's a very brief blurb as far as these things go. Sarah is the protagonist of this story, and she is one of the servants of the Bennet household and the 5 Bennet girls from Pride and Prejudice. But in the same way that servants' lives did not meaningfully interact with their employers at the time, Sarah does not go on to tell the story of, say, her becoming best friends with Lizzie Bennet. This is very much a historically accurate retelling. It is clearly very well researched. And even though Pride and Prejudice is a fictional story to begin with, the author Joe Baker has obviously done a lot of work to make sure that she represents the realities of servant life in this kind of household at that very time. So the downstairs intrigues and emotions seethe with just as much potency as the original events in Pride and Prejudice, and in fact are probably told with significantly heightened realism, because of course Austen was very reluctant to go into details and particulars of the practicalities of life. I mean, Jane Austen didn't even describe landscapes and environments and rooms in any great detail. She was very much preoccupied with the inner landscape of her characters, but Jo Baker here balances that very well. She is a very accomplished prose artist. Her characters are all very sympathetic, easy to get on board with, some very intriguing, most very intriguing, and the sheer reality of domestic life itself is very intriguing. This is one of those examples of a story where you learn a lot from reading it. So one really great example of the kinds of details that you can learn in this book occurs when, in the story of Pride and Prejudice, Mr. Collins, the distant cousin, is coming to stay, but Mr. Bennet, the owner of the house, the patriarch, is the only one who knows he's coming, and in his usual inconsiderate sort of fashion, he neglects to tell anyone until about one day before Mr. Collins' arrival. So not only does this greatly inconvenience his family, but it inconveniences the staff 3, 4, 10 times more, because of course they need to now consider everything for one extra person, and not just one extra person, but a person of some consequence to the family. So the interesting little detail comes when they have to air out the spare bedchamber for him, and of course in the cold damp of England it is musty and unpleasant and has to be made livable very quickly, and they would have of course begun airing it out and changed all the linens and things probably several days or even a week before, if they had known that Mr. Collins was coming. So in order to clean and refresh the room quickly, one of the things they do is push around some old tea leaves around the floor with a mop. So the damp, spent tea leaves, the tannins would give a nice quality to the wooden floors, and also at the same time wash the floors, and also the mild scent of tea would refresh the odour in the room and make it feel more homely, more lived in, and less like a cold, musty, unused dungeon. And I thought that the using of the tea leaves to wash a floor was a fabulous little piece of minutiae that I would never have known about how to maintain a house in 1812. So there's lots to be learned from this novel about the Regency period, but there's also a lot of intrigue, emotions, secrecy, confusion, and for the fan of Austen and Pride and Prejudice, lots of little Easter eggs in there to indicate to you what from the original novel is happening upstairs, such as the arrival of visitors to Netherfield Hall, and the various balls that the girls go off to. But of course we see it in this novel from the other side, so things like somebody had to be up very early in the morning to bank the fires for the family, and somebody had to spend all day cooking, and somebody or somebodies had to wait outside in the cold with the carriage and the horses whenever the Bennets wanted to go out in the evening, and would finish up their evening whenever they pleased, and somebody had to wait. And of course, to the less pleasant aspects, there were chamber pots and sheets to be cleaned, and linens to be done, and all of these sorts of things that the Bennets would have had done for them. So it's a fascinating novel, a beautifully rendered, gripping, sensual prose, and a very affectionate retelling of that particular place at that particular time. So I recommend this to you, and I'm going to put it on your library pile. So, moving to a completely different period of history, my next recommendation for you takes place partly during the Second World War, and then partly in modern times as the characters recollect. One character in particular recollects it. This is All That I Am by Anna Funder. Anna Funder is one of my countrymen. She is Australian, and in this book she tells a true story, or she imagines the events behind the lives of some real people, specifically for German Jewish revolutionary activists. Just on the eve of the Second World War, they are anti-Hitler activists who managed to flee to London and attempt to continue their work there. So I will read from the blurb for you again, and it begins with a quote from the first page. When Hitler came to power, I was in the bath. The wireless in the living room was turned up loud, but all that drifted down to me were waves of happy cheering, like a football match. It was Monday afternoon. Now, if that isn't the best first line in fiction, I don't know what is. When Hitler came to power, I was in the bath. Here's the blurb. Ruth Becker, defiant and cantankerous, is living out her days in Sydney. She has made an uneasy peace with the ghosts of her past, and a part of history that has been all but forgotten. Another lifetime away, it's 1939, and the world is going to war. Ernst Toller, self-doubting revolutionary and poet, sits in a New York hotel room, settling up the account of his life. When Toller's story arrives on Ruth's doorstep, their shared past slips under her defences, and she's right back among them. Those friends who predicted the brutality of the Nazis and gave everything they had to stop them. Those who were tested and in some cases found wanting in the face of hatred, of art, of love, and of history. So, Ruth Becker, as I said, is the elderly lady in Sydney, and she is facing a health problem. I believe it is something along the lines of either a brain tumor or Alzheimer's. And because of the way this is causing memories to come back to her, she is forced to reflect on that time. So she is one of the activists spoken of, and Ernst Toller, the real-life writer. And there is her cousin Dora between them, who was Ernst Toller's lover at a time, who is the most heroic, brave powerhouse of a person, Dora, and they both owe her so much, and indeed hundreds, perhaps thousands, perhaps millions of people owe their lives to the kind of work that brave people like Dora were doing. So in London, Ruth and Dora and a couple of other people continue the work of smuggling documents from Goering's office out of Germany and making sure they end up in the hands of Winston Churchill in an attempt to warn the world of Hitler's plans to go to war. But the problem is, at that time the Gestapo were already active in London, and a number of tragedies occur as these very brave people attempt to save the lives of so many. And in the middle of it there is love, there is romantic love, familial love, affection, and shifting perspectives, and I guess the weight of the past quite heavily on the shoulders of these two persons who have survived to tell the tale. So, I mean, all this sounds very drear, but it is a very exciting story. The character's pain and joy is so real, and even if the characters in this story were completely fictional, they would be no less real, and Afunda's ability to render these characters in a way that makes you completely sympathetic with them is really quite something to behold. She is an award-winning author, and for good reason, really. So I don't think to this date I have recommended to you an Australian author, so I am very happy to do that for you now. So let's put this on your reading pile. Now, here is a story which will teach you, I think, as much as it entertains you. We remain in the Second World War, but we move to Russia for The Bronze Horseman by Paulina Simons. Now, this is the first in a series of 4 novels set mostly during the Second World War and the period after, straight after. And I can guarantee that as soon as you finish this one, you will be running back here to get the next. So I'm very pleased to let you know that we have the other 3 novels, and you may take advantage of those as soon as you are finished with this one. Now, perhaps I have misrepresented this book slightly so far by not having yet mentioned that The Bronze Horseman is perhaps the most blisteringly epic love story in all of history. And yes, I mean all of history, all the way back to Tristan and Isolde, or the Western canon, at least. Paulina Simons has something of a flair for melodrama, but that makes the story even more lovable, particularly given that it is set against a horrific backdrop. The story begins in 1941, on the day when Russia officially enters the Second World War, and Hitler obviously is invading Russia. And the main character, Tatiana Metanova, is just turning 17 on this day, and so she is entrusted with going out and buying some food and supplies, because her family, of course, knows that given that war has just broken out, there will be a mad rush for food and kerosene and oil and useful things. Now, because this is communist Russia, Tatiana lives with her whole family in a very small 2-room apartment in Leningrad. She lives with her parents, her grandmother, her sister Dasha, and her twin brother, who has just gone away to a camp on the day this happens. And of course Tatiana is something of a dreamer and does not in any way realize the importance of what is happening, and so is a little tardy, and she dawdles and finds herself unable to actually purchase any food or oil. And it is here that she meets a Red Army officer called Alexander, who is immediately drawn to her and finds out about her problem, and he takes her back to the officers' hall where she can get some food and take it back to her family. And he of course accompanies her and helps her carry all the supplies. When they arrive, it is revealed that Alexander is the man whom Dasha has been dating. So even though Tatiana was immediately attracted to him, she decides in that moment she will absolutely not stand in the middle of this. And Dasha, of course, is unaware of the attraction between them. And so Tatiana thinks that things can just go on as normal if she just ignores her attraction to Alexander, who, as it turns out, is not in any way in love with Dasha, and he immediately begins visiting Tatiana and is quite persistent in walking her home from work, and the chemistry between them just becomes completely palpable, and it's just undeniable that they want to be together, but there's this force of filial love, a familial love, getting in the way. That's the love story. There is another character in this story, and that is the horrific, devastating historical event of the Siege of Leningrad, when Germany surrounded Leningrad in the onset of winter and attempted to starve the city to death and bombed the city relentlessly. And I must admit to having been somewhat ignorant to Russia's particular experience in the Second World War before I read this book, but Paulina Simon's, I believe her own grandmother, is somewhat the model for the character Tatiana and her experience during Russia in the Second World War. She may even have been present during the Siege of Leningrad. And so there is a lot that is historically accurate and very well researched, and the kind of painful, horrific details that only someone who had experienced it could tell you. So I won't go into great detail, but there's interesting things like talking of having to chip the ice off the stairwell in the apartment building just to get some water once the pipes have frozen and there is no infrastructure left in operation in Leningrad. And this was a new world city at the time. It was a huge city of, I think, over 1 million people, even in 1941, and all of them slowly starving to death in the winter, doing things like buying a loaf of bread for 100 rubles, and that bread getting thinner and thinner and more like glue and rocks, because very little new food was finding its way into Leningrad, paying an exorbitant amount of money for coffee that turns out to be really just a handful of coffee tasting soil, you know. It's just tragic. It was an absolutely horrendous, tragic event that devastates not only the Metanov family in this story, but also hundreds of thousands of Russians. So it's educational in that sense. You will learn a lot, but through it all, you have the indomitable spirit of Tatiana and Alexander. And Alexander harbors a very dangerous secret as well. And Alexander's best friend is in love with or in lust with Tatiana. And so he is a dangerous sort of figure in his own way. And it's a very intense story, and a very, very clearly fated love story that is so gripping. And even when the facts of the matter of the Siege of Leningrad become too depressing almost to bear, it's the attitudes and the actions and the fortitude and the love between these characters, not just the romantic couple, but the family and the other citizens of Leningrad, that really makes it a gripping story. And as I said, the most epic love story that you're ever going to come across, at least this year. So I will add this to your pile. So that's another 3 for you to be going on with, and hopefully you will be as entertained by these stories as I was. And if there is anything particular that you learn about history from these books that you didn't know before, I would love to hear what it is. And as always, I welcome your feedback. And I hope to see you at the ASMR library very soon.